Chapter 12. Well, that settles it. Clay broke the long silence in a mixture of dejection and relief. The hard decision as to what course to pursue had been taken out of his hands. Bill Bonney's out of luck this time. Damned if I know whether to thank Sam or Ezra or cuss him out. What happened? Press Moon demanded with anxious curiosity. I take it you met the kid. What's he got to say? Bonnie's taken Mr. Marble prisoner, Father, and demands the instant return of the 7-hook steers for his release, Esther told him. In the midst of his astonishment, Press was quick to assess the meaning of this all. Inevitably, he put his own interpretation on the fact. Well, I don't believe a word of it, he declared promptly and finally. Them two is up to some smooth game.
Dad! Esther exclaimed, shocked. How could you suggest such a thing? What could their object be?
Don't you see it? Moon tossed back. With old Doc free, he could reclaim them steers, and that'd be the end of it. But the way they got it fixed, they both got a claim on me. Bonnie can grab the steers, and I'd still owe Doc for 'em. Damn them buzzards! I knew it'd come to this.
Pat weighed the situation deliberately. It does look kind of tacky from your point of view, he admitted. Still, the right move might be to untangle this whole knot in a hurry.
Well, how would we do that? Moon demanded.
A little legal pressure on Bonnie might move him out of the country quick, Pat pointed out. Once on the run, he'll probably forget about those steers. Clay was following this talk with a wrinkled forehead.
But what'll become of Dad? He asked. The kid might knock him off if the law closes in and he has to run.
It posed a vital problem for him, and one he could not dismiss.
Ha! Scoffed Moon scornfully. Marble's safe enough. Him and Bonnie, they must be in cahoots, I tell you. That hostage stuff is just a smooth game. Turning Sheriff Almy loose on him with a posse would soon prove it.
In his perplexity, Clay turned to Pat for a decision. The latter refused, however, to espouse the Axe-Head rancher's views unreservedly. From what I saw there in Rock House Valley, I wouldn't swear Marble was playing any game, he said slowly. Once this is over, he'll take the kid's hide if he can. Meanwhile, of course, Bonnie's raw actions can't be passed over. We couldn't have done a thing, and that still is true. Personally, I'm in favor on calling on Sheriff Almy into the deal fast. Bonnie, he said it was under your move, he reminded Clay, and you can't knuckle under. Reluctantly, Clay signified his consent to this course.
Well, there's no point in holding off, he said. We'll get back to town and set the machinery in motion before the kid gets wise.
He spent 10 minutes with Esther before leaving. Pat was interested to note how the stress of uncertainty for them both had drawn the pair closer together. In the beginning, Clay and the girl had been friends at best, with little possibility of anything more between them. Each was now deeply concerned about the other's fortunes, and such was the forthright impression the range detective made that even Press Moon appeared to approve of Esther's undoubted interest in him. Ezra and Sam, they sure played hob with things, Clay remarked gloomily to Pat as they headed for town through the declining afternoon shade. But Pat was inclined to take a lenient view of the surprise move the partners had made. Neither of that pair ever showed himself to be a fool. It may turn out to be the best thing that could have been done, he observed mildly. Something has to break the deadlock, Clay. Maybe this is it. They reached Castle Gate soon after dark and met Sheriff Almy in front of the hotel. The lawman scrutinized them unemotionally.
Well, you're as good as your word, Stevens,
he grunted. Not that I want you right now. We want you, though. Briefly, Pat told of the meeting with Billy the Kid and of Doc Marble's abduction. It looks like your job, Helmy. Don't tell me no word of this has reached you yet from the Plum Bob. Sheriff Helmy looked flabbergasted at the news. I ain't heard a thing, he growled. But Marble often pulls away from the ranch for days at a time. Maybe Bonnie picked him up without being seen. Well, Bill Block is finished, but Dad isn't yet. Clay struck in harshly. Are you doing something, Elmy, or not? Oh, I'll do plenty, the sheriff promised. I'll gather a posse and get out there to Rockhouse Valley before dawn, just in case Bonnie ain't moved out yet. I'll want one of you along for a guide if you would, he added. I'm right here and waiting, Clay called after him as he moved off to set about his preparations. Sheriff Elmy succeeded in gathering his men by the time Pat and Clay had finished their supper, but it was another hour before they were ready to pull away. Aroused as many were by the news of Doc Marble's predicament, the townsmen were not overly anxious to do anything about it. Elmy had drawn his forces largely from the ranks of the Plum Bob ranchers who had happened to be in town. Among them, one was Windy Conklin, the former straw boss under Block, who had lately displayed an increasing inclination to assume authority in the Plum Bob affairs. Come on, let's go, Elmy, he called roughly to the sheriff. No point in wasting all this time over a canteen or two. Ferd shot him an ugly look, but said nothing, swinging into the saddle. At the last minute, Pat decided to remain behind. There were several things he wanted to do in town, and Clay was all that was needed to guide the way to the outlaw rendezvous. Placing no confidence in the likelihood of their finding the quarry in any event, he watched the posse ride off into the dark, a dozen strong, and then turned away. You're danged Jonah, Stevens, he was told sourly by Abe, the hotel man, half an hour later. Ain't been nothing but hell tearing loose since you showed up. What are you after now? I was just wanting a room, Pat grinned, and you can put it on Marble's bill. Starting to turn away from the desk, he paused. By the way, Gurley has a room here in the house, don't he? Yeah, number 14, Abe supplied readily. But you can't get in now. Gurley was out to the ranch today, he explained. He got back today and turned in an hour ago. Ain't used to traveling. My guess he's sound asleep. Pat climbed the stairs, located the Plum Bob agent's room, and knocked. He was forced to repeat the operation several times before a scuffle of feet sounded within, and the door yanked open. Ed Gurley scowled at him, clad in a woolen night skirt reaching below his knees. What do you want, Stevens? Light your light. Pat sat on the edge of the bed and watched Gurley touch a match to the wick and replace the glass and turn. I suppose you know old Doc's been abducted by Bill Bonney, he said then. Gurley gave kind of a grunt. Well, I was beginning to suspect something of that kind, he got out. I have my troubles with that ranch, Stevens, and Doc don't give me half enough help. I was out hunting for him today, no luck, of course, but no one out there knew what you're telling me. Weighing the man's consternation with care, Pat wondered why he should find it wanting. He got the impression, as well, that Gurley had by no means been asleep upon his arrival. Troubles? He echoed mildly. What would they be? It's this hulking brute, Windy Conklin, for one thing, Gurley told him in gloomy accents. Marble's been slow in naming a man to replace Block, and Conklin started to take the job over on his own accord. He's kind of getting out of hand. Pat's own impression of Conklin, a bulky, overbearing, loud-mouthed individual, hadn't been favorable, but he pretended ignorance. What's the matter with Conklin?
He won't take orders,
Gurley bluntly put.
Doc was inclined to laugh him off, and that made it worse. With Marble out of the way altogether,
He predicted darkly.
Conklin will swagger around and be simply impossible.
It could be that Clay could be persuaded to take charge and straighten things out. Gurley stared at him in amazement, his guard down for 1 second.
He wouldn't,
He jerked out quickly.
with his father in danger, he'll think nothing else. How could he?
Resolution gathered in the grave face.
And aren't you supposed to be siding with him now, Stevens?
Pat's nod was easy. Nothing was said about wiping his nose. He's with Ferd Elmy. That should be safe enough. Gurley walked back and forth restlessly, his eyes darting.
I suspect this job is too much for me, he groaned. Maybe I can hang on somewhere till this ends.
They talked a few minutes longer, not getting anywhere, and Pat left. In his own room he found himself going over Ed Gurley's every word and act with attention. Was the business agent actually the overburdened weakling he wished to appear? Pat knew that under Doc Marble's massive domination, a man had either to dissimulate or go under. Gurley had not complained before, under what would have proved a heavier load. If he was pretending now, it was the act of a consummated order. In the morning, Pat sought out Jake Starbuck and found that the merchant in his cubbyhole office in the rear of the store. Well, Starbuck, he took a chair at the end of the desk. Anything new on the blocks killing? Elmy was too busy to ask. Jake leaned back.
Not a thing, Stevens. I'm afraid Ferd ain't much of a sleuth. That business of quizzing you and Clay was all foolishness, of course, but what's all this about Bonnie grabbing Doc?
Sufficiently mature to take a quiet view of the affair, he listened to what Pat was able to tell him and scratched his grizzled thatch thoughtfully.
Doc needs something like this, he hazarded then. He's slacked off on the reins the last few years, and it ain't been good. Letting Bonnie and them owl hoots ride right into his ranch that way, maybe he'll learn himself a lesson.
His view that Marble was in no great danger and would be eventually returned coincided with Pat's own. But the day passed, and Elmy's posse jogged in late in the afternoon empty-handed, and the Plum Bob rancher failed to put in an appearance. Clay's face was long when he reported the meager results of the ride to Pat. Elmy had closed in on the outlaw hideout at dawn, only to find the cave empty and abandoned. A long day's search had failed to turn up any sign, and Sheriff Elmy intended to resume the hunt, but Clay himself was worn out, and he went to bed and slept for 12 hours. Elmy had pulled out again the following morning before Clay was about. Provoked as he was, he told Pat he did not intend to follow the sheriff.
Elmy's an old woman,
he growled, spurred to reckless speech by anxiety.
He pokes around at a dog trot and gets nowhere. The kid's probably laughing at us.
Well, what do you do then, Clay? Marble had his answer ready.
I'll see if I can't locate Sam and Ezra, he announced. You coming along?
Pat shook his head. Those steers aren't the important thing right now, but you go ahead, I'll stick around and keep an eye out. Clay rode away a few minutes later, driven by his reckless need to do something. Pat wandered over to the Corando bar, where he stood looking in from the door. Windy Conklin, the Plum Bob camp boss, who had taken Bill Block's job on himself, was another who had not gone with Sheriff Elmy today. With cool authority, he had delegated another man to take his place and was holding forth in the bar just at present before an attentive group of listeners.
All poppycock this trotting around Almy's doing,
he averred with lofty conviction. "It's plain the kid is after something big. Ransom money like as not. He'll get in touch with us, you never fear, and when he does, bingo, I'll grab Marble away from him," Conklin bragged, "so fast that he won't even have time to blink." He was a big, tow-headed man, with uncommon spread of shoulders and a lumpy face. Bulk alone had gained him prestige among men, and he was obviously used to throwing his weight around. Pat shoved into the saloon quietly and leaned his elbow on the bar, a crooked finger at Conklin. Frowning pretentiously, Windy blustered forward. "I understand you're the new ramrod," Pat told him easily. "Sure." There was little modesty in Conklin's hard manner. "What of it?" "Oh, nothing much. I know it's far from an easy job for anyone to swing. I was wondering if Gurley's cattleman enough to help you with the stock movements while Marble's away." "Oh, he certainly thinks so, and to hell with him." Conklin threw it roughly. He stared closely at Pat. "Let's see, you're Stevens, eh? Just been added to the payroll, I hear. Doing anything to earn it?" "How would you know?" Pat retorted sharply. "I wasn't hired to keep an eye on you, was I? Someone had to put Block away. Any man in a big hurry to grab his job wouldn't be too bad of a candidate to look at." Some of the pompousness went out of Windy at this. His thick features flushed up and the bird-like eyes squinted. "Don't be getting wise, Stevens, or you'll be the first hombre I fire." Pat grinned in his face. "I just wanted you to know you're not the big hog, Conklin, even if Marble's been gone for a while. He'll be back, and he'll take full account of your bluff, just remember that." Conklin wheeled away in a huff, by no means accustomed to bruck domination of any sort. Just now he was going slow, and Pat had amused himself by proving this to be the case. He nodded to himself, satisfied that Conklin was under orders from someone, regardless of his blustery swagger. By morning, Conklin had disappeared from Castlegate. The long day passed, and still there was no word from Doc Marble. Elmy's posse straggled in, no more successful than before, and Pat was beginning to wonder what Clay's luck would be. Even if the range detectives succeeded in locating Ezra and Sam with the steers, he could not now open negotiations with Bill Bonney, for the elusive outlaw, together with his hostage, seemed to have disappeared completely. Pat had his answer that evening. About to turn into the Veheshen for his supper, he paused at sight of two men riding in at the upper end of the street, pushing their horses hard. Press Moon was in the lead, and Clay riding close behind him. "Hey there, Stevens!" The rancher pulled up in a swirl of dust and stepped down heavily. "Maybe you'd know what to do about this." "What's that?" Pat was all attention. "Windy Conklin turned up at my ranch today," Moon blurted out angrily. "He said word was going around I'd lost the steers Doc let me have on shares, and he gave me a last warning." "A last warning?" Pat almost laughed. "What could he be warning you about?" Press failed to see the humor in the situation. "Well, Conklin claimed it was Gurley's doing, and he had no choice. Turn back the steers to the plumb bob pronto, he says, or I'll be throwing off my ranch. He gave me 2 days, Stevens, and I gotta be making up my mind in a hurry." "Not so fast." Pat was amazed. "They can't evict you for anything like that, Moon. It's preposterous." Press's face was livid with nagging fear. "You don't know Plumb Bob if you think so," he glared. "All they ever did was needin' a flimsy excuse. Doc Marble's behind it all. I know he was up to something sly, and this proves it. You notice he ain't around to have it thrown in his face. Well, he's cute, all right. Always wanted to get himself a foothold in that Apache cache, and now this is his chance. Once there, he'll manage to drive out all the Mormons, too. You mark my words." Listening the while to the spat of venomous accusations, Clay did not look all too cheerful. His eye met Pat and dropped, and Pat knew what was in his mind. Little inclined as the latter was to credit the imminence of this new catastrophe, he was frankly bothered. There was no question about it. The whole thing looked only too much like a colossal grab worthy of conscienceless range pirate with the expert help of ruthless outlaws. Not a man in the entire territory, Pat knew, was in a better position than Doc Marble to engineer such a deal and get away with it. End of chapter 12.